Have you ever wondered why certain emotions like guilt, fear, or self-doubt seem to pull the strings behind your decisions? Why you sabotage things that matter most? Or repeat patterns you promised yourself you'd outgrow? Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist, believed he knew why. He wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." In other words, the more we ignore the shadow, the more it controls us. The shadow is not a demon or curse. It's the part of you you've learned to hide the traits, impulses, desire, and emotions deemed unacceptable by your family, culture, or environment. So you buried them, pushed them down, labeled them bad, and pretended they were gone. But they didn't disappear. They went underground into the subconscious, where they began shaping your choices, your relationships, and your self-image. Without your permission, you may think you're in control, but the shadow speaks in your reactions, in the way you judge others, in the things you avoid, and in the moments you feel most ashamed of who you are. But here's the twist. The shadow doesn't just contain what's ugly, it also holds what's untapped. Your assertiveness, your creativity, your fire, your forgotten power. It's not the part of you to fear, it's the part of you to face. But if the shadow is shaping you in silence, what happens when you finally meet it face to face? Personal and collective. Everyone has a shadow. Not a myth. Not a metaphor. A psychological reality. Carl Jung described the shadow as the hidden part of ourselves, the aspects we reject, suppress, or denude. It includes the emotions, impulses, and traits we've learned to label as wrong, bad, shameful, or simply, not me. But here's the key. The shadow isn't created by what's inherently bad, it's created by what's deemed unacceptable. From an early age, we absorb unspoken rules. Don't cry. Don't be too loud. Don't want too much. Don't be angry. Don't be vulnerable. Don't outshine others. To survive, we conform. To be loved, we adapt. We learn which parts of us are rewarded and which are punished. The punished parts get locked away. This process happens quietly, unconsciously. It isn't a decision, it's a survival response. But what happens to what's been hidden? It doesn't vanish. It waits, in silence, in the subconscious, until it begins to shape your life from the background without you realizing it. That's the personal shadow. It can contain rage you were never allowed to express, sexuality you were told was shameful, talents you were too afraid to own, dreams you abandoned to feel safe. And this repression carries consequences. Maybe you say yes when you want to scream no. Maybe you play small in rooms where you're meant to lead. Maybe you sabotage relationships, careers, or joy because some part of you was taught it wasn't deserved. The shadow becomes the silent puppeteer behind your reactions. You overreact to small comments. You judge people who express what you're afraid to. You feel guilt where no guilt is needed, or shame where pride should live. But the shadow isn't just personal. It scales. Carl Jung also spoke of the collective shadow, the denied, disowned aspects of an entire culture, nation, or group. Think about this. A society that idolizes success often buries rest, softness, and vulnerability. A culture that rewards dominance may reject empathy, compassion, or emotional expression. And those rejected traits, what's suppressed, doesn't vanish, it reroots. In social systems, the collective shadow can show up as racism, sexism, xenophobia, any form of othering that keeps us from seeing ourselves in each other. Look around social media, outrage cycles, cancel culture, moral purity tests. They all carry the fingerprint of a collective, unwilling to face its own contradictions. We publicly shame what we privately fear. We attack in others what we haven't healed in ourselves. And the more we suppress, the more these shadows leak out through violence, division, dysfunction. Because what isn't faced finds a way, individually, socially, systemically. This is why shadow work matters, not just for your personal growth, but for collective healing. Here's a simple truth most people miss. The traits you hide are often the ones you need most. Take anger. When repressed, it festers as resentment, anxiety, or explosive outbursts. But integrated, anger becomes boundaries, self-respect, personal power, or vulnerability. When denied, it turns into isolation and shame. But expressed, it opens the door to connection, intimacy, trust, or ambition. When repressed, it becomes envy. When accepted, it drives you forward toward your purpose. So the shadow is not evil. It's unintegrated energy. It's potential waiting for permission. It's your wholeness, hidden in plain sight. And it's always communicating with you through emotional triggers, dreams, projections, compulsions. The question is, are you listening? Because until you see the shadow, you'll continue mistaking its voice for your identity. You'll think this is just how I am, when really, it's who you've become in order to survive. But survival is not the same as wholeness. And you didn't come here just to survive. You came here to remember who you are, all of you. And to become that, you must first meet the parts you've pushed away. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your unfinished conversation. It's the version of you that's been waiting for your return. And the parts we're taught to suppress don't disappear. They redirect, often into our judgments, our emotions, and our relationships. So how do you recognize the shadow when it's hiding in plain sight? Let's take a closer look at one of its clearest signs: projection, the mirror we can't stop looking into. Have you ever met someone and instantly disliked them without knowing why? Maybe it was their tone, the way they walked, or the confidence in their voice. It irritated you. It made your skin crawl. It felt irrational, but it was real. This could be your shadow speaking through projection. Carl Jung believed that one of the most common ways the shadow reveals itself is through psychological projection, the unconscious act of placing our disowned traits onto someone else. In his words, we still attribute to the other all the evil and inferior qualities that we do not like to recognize in ourselves. Projection acts like a mirror, but a warped one. It reflects not who they are, but what we haven't yet faced in ourselves. Here's how it works. Let's say you're bothered by a colleague's arrogance. They speak up in meetings. They take credit for ideas, You label them selfish or attention-seeking. But pause. Ask yourself, why does it bother you so much? Is it possible that what you're reacting to isn't just them, but a disowned part of yourself? Maybe, somewhere along the way, you were taught that wanting recognition was shameful, that being confident was too much. So you buried your need to be seen. And now, when someone else owns that space freely, it pokes the part of you that never got permission to. That discomfort you feel, that emotional charge, it's not just about the other person. It's a message from your shadow. And this doesn't just happen at work. Think about your personal life. A friend who's too emotional, a sibling who's too needy, a parent who never seems satisfied. What if they're not the problem? What if they're activating something you haven't fully accepted? Projection thrives in our closest relationships, because that's where we let our guard down, and that's where our unresolved wounds surface first. But here's something we often overlook. Projection isn't always negative. It's not just about judgment or irritation. It also shows up in admiration in the people we envy or idolize. You might look at someone who's bold, creative, or unapologetically authentic, and feel a strange mix of admiration and resentment. Why? Because they're living out a part of you that's still buried. That boldness you love, it might be your golden shadow. That creativity you admire, it could be yours still waiting to be expressed. We don't just project our shame. We also project our brilliance. The key is to notice the emotional charge, whether it's love, envy, anger, or awe. If it's intense, it's worth exploring. Because emotions are not random. They're roadmaps. They point us toward unhealed wounds and undiscovered strengths. Let's be clear, not every annoyance is a projection. Sometimes people are simply toxic, manipulative, or out of alignment. But when a reaction feels bigger than the moment, when it lingers longer than it should, or repeats across multiple situations, that's when it's time to ask, what part of me is being mirrored right now? This question doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It shifts you from reactivity to reflection, from blame to self-awareness, and from judgment to healing. Because the more aware you become of your projections, the more control you gain over your reactions. You stop leaking energy through unnecessary conflict. You stop outsourcing your emotions to others, and you begin to reclaim what was never truly gone, just hidden. So the next time someone triggers you, pause, breathe, and ask, what is this person showing me about myself? Is there a part of me I've disowned that's trying to surface? Is this anger really mine? Sometimes, the people we can't stand are carrying the exact traits we need to recover. And sometimes, the people we admire are reflecting the future version of us we've yet to embody. So what if the people who trigger you are actually showing you who you've buried inside yourself? Let's go deeper. Let's look at what's inside the shadow, not just what we've repressed, but what we've forgotten we're capable of. Most people think of the shadow as the place we bury our worst traits, our anger, our selfishness, our jealousy. But that's only half the story. The shadow doesn't just hold the parts of you you've learned to reject. It also holds the parts of you you've forgotten to value: your boldness, your creativity, your power, your voice. Carl Jung called this the golden shadow, the hidden strengths brilliance, and potential we disown, not because they're bad, but because they felt dangerous to express. Think about it. Have you ever admired someone's courage? Their ability to speak their mind, or to take up space without apology, and felt a strange ache inside? That's not just admiration. That's resonance. It's your golden shadow trying to get your attention. Maybe you were taught that speaking up is rude, that wanting more is greedy, that being seen is arrogant. So you learned to dim, to shrink, to play safe. But the traits you buried didn't disappear. They just went underground. And now, every time you see someone living them out loud, something stirs inside you. Not because you're missing those traits, but because you've disowned them. Let's take assertiveness. In many cultures, especially for women, assertiveness is misunderstood. It's labeled as aggression, too much, too loud, too ambitious. So, instead of learning to set boundaries, you learn to smile through discomfort, to apologize for taking up space, to stay quiet when your voice matters most. But assertiveness isn't a flaw. It's clarity in motion. It's the voice that says, "This matters. I matter." When you reclaim your assertiveness, you don't become rude. You become real. Or take creativity. How many of us were told, "Be practical"? That's not a real career. Art doesn't pay the bills. So your imagination, once expansive and alive, was replaced by boxes, checklists, deadlines. But creativity doesn't vanish. It waits. It shows up in your restlessness, in your envy of others who express freely, in your longing to create something. It's not that you're not creative, it's that your creativity got buried in your shadow, alongside your desire, your confidence, your unfiltered self-expression. Let's make this real with a story. A client of mine, we'll call her Lian, spent most of her life shrinking, raised in a family that prized humility and obedience. She was praised for being the quiet one. She built her life around being helpful, agreeable, unseen. But beneath the surface, she was deeply opinionated, sharp, visionary, and exhausted from hiding it. When we began her shadow work, she resisted owning her desire to lead. She feared being called arrogant, selfish, too ambitious. But week by week, as she explored her golden shadow, she started sharing her voice online. She launched a coaching brand, something she'd dreamed of for years, but never dared. Within months, her clarity and confidence drew in an audience, not because she became someone else, but because she finally stopped hiding who she already was. Her greatest strength had always been there. It was just waiting for permission. This is the power of shadow work, when you go beyond the dark. When you explore not only what you fear, but what you desire. The truth is, most people aren't just afraid of their darkness. They're afraid of their light, of being too much, of standing out, of failing. Yes, but also of succeeding. Because success demands visibility. It requires owning your voice, your needs, your truth. And for many, that visibility feels unsafe because it once was. But here's the good news. Your golden shadow isn't gone. It's waiting. The traits you envy, the boldness, brilliance, or creativity, might not be missing in you. They might just be hiding. So how do you reclaim them? In the next section, We'll break down the practical tools of shadow work, not just to heal your past, but to unleash your power. Shadow work isn't just a concept, it's a practice. And the real transformation begins when theory meets action. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about listening more closely to what your discomfort is trying to tell you. Because shadow work lives in your everyday emotions and your strongest reactions. They're often messengers in disguise. Let's say you're irritated when someone brags, or you tense up when a friend shares something vulnerable, or maybe you feel resentment when someone cancels on you last minute. Instead of brushing it off, pause, feel it, and ask, what is this reaction really about? Your emotions are not the enemy. They are roadmaps. Every trigger is an invitation to look within. This is where mindfulness becomes your first and most essential tool, not the kind that requires sitting on a cushion for an hour, but the kind that happens in real life when you notice instead of react. Mindfulness helps you shift from autopilot to awareness, from emotional reflex to conscious choice, and neuroscience backs this up. When you observe your inner experience without judgment, you calm the amygdala, your brain's threat center, and activate the prefrontal cortex where decision-making and insight live. This single shift in attention begins to rewire your nervous system. Over time, it changes how you respond and who you become. So here's a powerful tool to begin with: projection pause. The next time you feel a surge of judgment, anger, or irritation, stop, breathe, and ask, is this about them? Or is this a reflection of something in me? Am I seeing them clearly, or through the lens of my own shadow? This question alone can transform tension into insight. Now let's make it real with a simple daily rhythm, a 3-step daily routine for shadow awareness. Step 1. Morning grounding. 5 minutes before the day pulls you in all directions. Pause. Close your eyes. Take a few breaths. And ask, what's alive in me right now? What feeling is most present without trying to change it? This simple check-in brings you back to yourself. It sets your nervous system into coherence before the world demands your attention. Step 2. Midday projection pause. 1 minute, sometime during the day. You'll feel it: a sharp reaction, tension in the chest, a flare of annoyance, a silent judgment. This is the moment. Instead of reacting, reflect. Take 1 breath. Ask, what is this showing me about myself? This tiny practice done daily builds emotional intelligence faster than any self-help book ever could. Step 3. Evening shadow journal. 10 to 15 minutes before bed. Take a few moments to write. Not for perfection, not for grammar, but for truth. Ask yourself, where did I feel most reactive today? Where did I feel most alive? What part of me wanted to speak, but didn't? Let it flow. No filters, no edits. Because your shadow doesn't speak through grammar, it speaks through ache. And the page is where it begins to feel safe. Shadow work isn't about dramatic breakthroughs. It's about small, consistent moments of turning inward. Moments where you pause instead of react, where you reflect instead of blame, where you stay present, especially when it's hard. And the more you practice, the more your body learns. I am safe to feel. I am safe to see what I've hidden. I am safe to be whole. So don't wait for the big emotional breakdown. Start with the micro moments, because over time, they become your new default. Not perfection, but presence. And presence is the birthplace of transformation. But where does the shadow hide most cleverly? Often in the stories we tell or avoid. Let's explore how myth, characters, and archetypes reveal what we hide and what we're meant to reclaim. Long before we had psychology, we had myth. Before we had the language to describe trauma, defense mechanisms, or projection, we had gods, monsters, heroes, and villains. And somehow, those stories still move us, still disturb us, still feel personal. Why? Because myth speaks the language of the unconscious. It bypasses logic and goes straight to the shadow. Take Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. On the surface, it's a horror story, but underneath, it's a parable of repression. A man trying to separate himself from his darker urges, only to be consumed by them. Hyde isn't an external monster. He's the part of Jekyll that was denied, and in that denial, grew wild and uncontrollable. The lesson is clear: what we exile eventually erupts. The same pattern appears in myth after myth. Trickster gods like Loki, Hermes, or Coyote. They lie, deceive, disrupt. And yet they are never just evil. They're clever, creative, unpredictable. They break the rules that no longer serve. They expose hypocrisy. They bring transformation through chaos. In Jungian terms, the trickster is a shadow archetype. He represents everything we find uncomfortable: impulse, rebellion, contradiction, duality. And yet, he also brings growth. Because only by confronting contradiction can we become whole. But mythology doesn't end in the past. It lives in today's pop culture. Think about the Joker, not just a villain, but a mirror. He exposes the madness hiding beneath civilization. He's not just chaos, he's society's pain, ignored for too long, finally laughing back. Or Walter White in Breaking Bad, the chemistry teacher turned drug kingpin. His descent is horrifying, yet compelling, because beneath the crime, we see a man reclaiming his suppressed ambition, anger, and need for power. It resonates because his shadow is our shadow, the desire to matter, to be seen, to stop playing small. Or take Loki from the Marvel Universe. Cunning, unpredictable, deeply wounded. A master manipulator, but also a truth teller. The shadow of the hero. He doesn't just challenge the gods, he exposes the cracks in their moral facade. The characters we fear are often the parts of ourselves we don't want to see. And the ones we're drawn to, especially the villains we secretly love, usually reflect something unclaimed in us. That's the brilliance of archetype. It gives form to what's formless. It externalizes what's internal. So here's your practice. Choose a character, one you find oddly fascinating. Maybe you fear them. Maybe you admire them. Maybe you both. Now rewrite their story. From their point of view, step inside their motives, their wound, their unmet need. Ask, what do they want most? What have they been denied? What part of me feels the same way? This simple exercise reveals more than you expect, because often the characters you can't stop thinking about are speaking the parts of you that haven't had a voice. The villain might be your shadow in costume, and when you explore these stories consciously, they stop being fiction and start becoming reflection. You begin to see your life, your patterns, your defenses in mythic form. This is why certain stories stay with us, why certain characters haunt us, why some tales never leave our psyche. Because deep down, we know they aren't just stories about others. They're stories about us. These stories don't just entertain us, they reveal us to ourselves. And now that you've seen how the shadow speaks through myth, let's bring that insight back to reality and explore how the shadow operates on a larger scale, not just inside individuals, but inside entire cultures. Let's talk about the collective shadow. The shadow isn't just personal, it's collective. Carl Jung understood this well. He once wrote, "The world will ask you who you are. And if you don't know, the world will tell you. And what the world tells us about who's worthy, who belongs, what's acceptable, and what isn't shapes far more than we realize. It shapes not just individuals, but entire cultures. This is the collective shadow. It's what happens when a society decides certain truths are too uncomfortable to name, certain histories too shameful to remember, and certain human traits too risky to allow. But denial doesn't erase a reality. It buries it. And what we bury together, we carry together. Think about the messages we're raised with. Men must be strong, never soft. Women must be sweet, never angry. Productivity equals value. Rest is laziness. Emotion is weakness. Perfection is the goal. Sound familiar? These aren't just personal beliefs. They're programmed defaults wired into our education, our media, our workplaces, even our families. And they come at a cost. We see it in the burnout epidemic, in skyrocketing anxiety, in emotional suppression masked as discipline, in leaders who perform strength but fear vulnerability. We see it in division, in finger-pointing, in outrage that spirals before anyone even asks why. Because when a society represses its shadow, that shadow doesn't disappear. It leaks through extremism, through moral scapegoating, through movements that begin with justice but end in vengeance. René Girard called it the scapegoat mechanism. We offload our collective guilt onto a person, a group, a symbol, and call it righteousness. Jung said it simply: the world is still full of scapegoats. Until we confront what we've projected, we'll keep repeating it generation after generation. So here's the truth most people avoid. You cannot heal the world if you haven't begun to heal yourself. Because culture isn't some abstract machine. It's built on human behavior, layered over time, reinforced by repetition. Which means real change starts small. It starts with you. When one person stops projecting, they stop attacking what they haven't accepted. They listen deeper, respond slower, judge less. They become what Jung called a container, someone who can hold contradiction without collapsing into it. That's what we need. Not more perfection, but more integration. So what does that look like practically? It looks like dialogue, not debate. Spaces where people can speak what's true without being punished for not being perfect. It looks like accountability, not cancellation. Spaces where harm is addressed. But people are also allowed to grow. It looks like leadership from the inside out: parents, teachers, managers, creatives doing their inner work, so they're not leading from wounds. It looks like complexity being normalized, so we can say, yes, people are messy. Yes, we all get it wrong. And yes, healing is still possible. Collective healing is not a slogan. It's a practice, a commitment. It means asking, what conversations do we avoid? What truths do we bury? Who are we making carry our guilt so we don't have to? Because shadow work isn't just personal growth. It's cultural hygiene. It's emotional maturity at scale. It's choosing to respond, not just react, to repair, not just punish, to feel, not just perform. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's absolutely necessary. Because every time one person chooses reflection over reactivity, the field shifts. Every time a group chooses repair over revenge, the culture heals, one moment at a time. You cannot heal society if you haven't begun the healing inside yourself. And that healing begins by reclaiming the parts of you were taught to exile. In the next section, we move from awareness to integration, the final step in becoming whole. If there's one message Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to teach, it's this: wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Most of us have been taught the opposite. We strive to become better, not whole. We aim for perfection, not integration. We try to fix the parts of ourselves that don't fit some ideal while secretly fearing they'll always come back. But individuation, the process Jung described as the key to psychological maturity, isn't about eliminating flaws. It's about embracing the full spectrum of who we are. That means the confident and the insecure, the kind and the jealous, the peaceful and the angry. To individuate is to recognize that all of it belongs. When we begin this process, something powerful shifts. We stop managing symptoms and start listening to the source, to the voice beneath the mask, to the part that's always been watching, waiting, remembering. Because the goal of shadow work isn't self-improvement, it's self-contact. Let's make this real. Imagine a father who's constantly frustrated with his child's emotional outbursts. He tries to be calm. He reads parenting books. But something in him keeps snapping. Through shadow work, he realizes he was never allowed to express emotion growing up. He was told to man up, to tough it out. So now, seeing his child's raw emotion doesn't just challenge his patience, it threatens his entire identity. When he begins to integrate his own emotional repression, he doesn't just become a better father. He becomes a more complete human being, able to meet vulnerability with presence, not defensiveness. Or think about a young entrepreneur. She's brilliant, capable, yet she hesitates to speak up in rooms full of power. Why? Because deep down, she still carries a story that ambition is arrogance, that being too visible is dangerous, that her ideas are only safe if they stay small. Through shadow work, she reclaims her suppressed voice, not by forcing confidence, but by healing the fear underneath it. She stops shrinking. She starts leading, not from ego, but from integration. And then there's the executive, decades into his career, yet still haunted by imposter syndrome, still playing the part, still avoiding the mirror. When he begins to meet the parts of himself he's long denied, his grief, his softness, his younger self, he doesn't become less of a leader. He becomes more of one, because the more whole we are inside, the less armor we need on the outside. That's the true gift of individuation. It reduces defensiveness. It increases clarity. It expands emotional bandwidth. You're no longer reacting to old wounds in real-time situations. You're responding wisely, calmly, humanely. You're able to sit in discomfort without needing to escape, project, or attack. And from that grounded place, you make better decisions. You hold deeper relationships. You lead with authenticity, not performance. Individuation isn't a lightning bolt. It's a slow unfolding, a conversation between your conscious and unconscious self. Sometimes it's gentle, sometimes it's disruptive, but it always leads inward. It asks, can I hold space for contradiction within me? Can I be both a work in progress and already enough? Can I live from truth, not just image? This process doesn't make you flawless. It makes you real, more available to life, more honest in love, more whole without needing to be perfect. And yes, it takes time. As Jung put it, individuation is a long process of negotiation, because you're not just changing behavior, you're changing how you relate to yourself. But here's what's beautiful. Every layer you integrate becomes power. You reclaim. Every shadow you embrace becomes energy returned. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop performing your identity. You start living here, now, fully. But integration isn't just a concept. It's a lived experience felt in body, breath, and daily action. And in the next section, we'll ground this inner work with practice. A visualization to help you not just understand your shadow, but invite it home. You've explored your shadow. You've named it. You've followed the emotional breadcrumbs. You've even begun to reclaim what was hidden. But now comes the hardest and most healing part: self-acceptance. Not surface level, not temporary, but a deep, grounded acceptance of all that you are. That's where true transformation begins. Because, without acceptance, awareness becomes another way to judge yourself. You uncover your patterns, only to shame them. You see your wounds, only to hide them again. But the shadow doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be welcomed. That's where meditation comes in, not as a ritual of escape, but as a homecoming, a practice of sitting with what is, with no need to change, explain, or perform. Let's begin a short guided practice right here. Find a quiet space. Sit comfortably. Let your eyes close. Gently, breathe in, slowly, and exhale completely. Again, inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. Let your shoulders drop. Now, imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror, but instead of your usual reflection, you see a shadowy figure. This figure isn't dangerous. It isn't evil. It's familiar. It holds the traits you've suppressed, the emotions you've silenced, the dreams you've buried, the wounds you've ignored. Notice how it stands. Notice how it breathes. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to be seen. Now, slowly, take a step closer. Look it in the eyes. And as you breathe, silently say, "I see you. I'm listening now. You're part of me. And I no longer reject you." Pause here. Let the words settle. If emotions arise, let them come. Tears, warmth, resistance, numbness, whatever it is. Just notice it. Now take one more step and imagine embracing this part of you, not to change it, not to erase it, but to reunite with it as you hold this part close. Repeat, "I accept you. I forgive myself for abandoning you. From now on, we walk together." Breathe in, and as you exhale, feel that integration. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Bring yourself back to the present, to your body, to your space. This is the beginning of self-belonging. But don't stop here. To truly internalize this work, you need a space to reflect, to observe, and to track what emerges. That's where journaling becomes essential. Here's a simple 7-day journal prompt journey to deepen your integration. Day 1. What parts of myself have I been ashamed to show? Day 2. What do I judge most in others? And how might that live in me? Day 3. When do I feel most fake or disconnected from my truth? Day 4. What qualities have I always admired, but never fully owned? Day 5. What stories from my past shaped what I learned to suppress? Day 6. What does my shadow want to say if I stop silencing it? Day 7. What would it feel like to walk through the world as my whole self? You don't need perfect answers. You don't even need to finish every sentence. The goal isn't performance. It's presence. Let these reflections become a conversation between you and the parts of you that have waited to be heard. Because shadow work isn't just inner work, it's inner reunion. And as we begin to accept ourselves not in pieces, but as a whole, something greater unfolds. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not control, but peace. Let's carry that forward as we step into the final chapter of this journey. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the essence of shadow work. It's not about escaping who you are. It's about turning toward the very parts you were taught to fear, and discovering that what you've been avoiding is what you've been needing most. Throughout this journey, we've explored the shadow not as an enemy, but as a guide. We've learned that the traits we suppress often hold the keys to our strength, that our emotional triggers are not flaws, they're signals, that projection hides truth, and that the people who trigger us most might be carrying a part of ourselves we're still afraid to meet. We've seen that stories, myths, and archetypes are mirrors for our buried selves, and that healing isn't just personal, it's collective. But now comes the most important part: action. Because awareness is just the first step. Integration happens through embodiment, through choice, through practice. So here's what you can do next. Right now, 1. Download the free Shadow Work Journal, Inside. You'll find guided prompts, weekly reflection tools, and practical space to track your emotional insights. Start small. Write honestly. Be brave with the pen. Join the 21-day Shadow Integration Challenge. Commit to showing up for yourself every single day. 3 weeks, 15 minutes a day. One transformation that begins within. We'll walk with you, prompt by prompt, pattern by pattern. San, comment below. What part of your shadow spoke to you most today? Was it the golden shadow you've been denying, or the emotional trigger that finally made sense? Your comment might help someone else recognize themselves too. Because when one person speaks the truth, it gives others permission to do the same. And remember this, you don't need to become someone else. You don't need to keep fixing yourself. You just need to remember who you are and reclaim what you've hidden. Shadow work isn't a path toward perfection. It's a return to wholeness. So the next time something triggers you, pause, breathe, and ask, what part of me is being called home? This is not the end. This is your beginning. Your invitation to live less from fear and more from truth. So download the journal, take the challenge, do the work, and most of all be gentle with yourself. Because you were never broken, just buried. You're not here to fix yourself. You're here to remember who you are and reclaim what you've hidden. Let the shadow guide you home.